I'm Dimitris Xygalatas, and I have a joint appointment between Aarhus University, Denmark, and Masaryk University, Brno. I'm trained both in the study of religion and in anthropology. I spent more than 3 years in the field, and what I do is study ritual, and especially I study extreme rituals. Things like fire walking, self-piercing, or walking on knives, and things like that. The big question that drives my research is the really big question. And the question is why, right? Why do people engage in these behaviors? Why do they subscribe to these seemingly irrational beliefs? It's a really intriguing question. Throughout my research, I've focused on two main rituals that are very widely performed. So I studied the firewalking rituals of Greece and Spain, and you have similar firewalking rituals around the world. And I also studied the Kavadi ritual that Hindus perform. This is a really intense ritual that involves people piercing their skin with multiple needles and hooks and even skewers through their cheeks. And this is one of the most widely performed high arousal rituals on the planet because you can find it wherever you have members of the Hindu diaspora, and especially Tamils. So people will start with fasting for 10 days. Some people go through hardships like they sleep on the floor for these 10 days. The day of the actual Kavadi, they will assemble at a riverbank and they will start getting pierced. And that involves putting needles through their skin, anywhere between one needle through the tongue or a few hundreds of needles throughout the skin and throughout the body. This ritual is called the Kavadi, right? And the Kavadi is actually this big structure. The word itself means burden, something you carry. And it's a bamboo structure that resembles a small temple. It can be anywhere between 5 and 40 kilos. And they will carry this on their shoulders for the entire procession that can last 4 or 5 hours while being pierced with all these needles and hooks and skewers. Some people will have hooks in the ribs and chains attached to those hooks, which are dragging very heavy carts that are, again, like miniature temples on wheels, and they will drag those for the full 4 or 5 hours. At the end of the procession, they have to climb 142 steps to reach the temple of Muruga, carrying these Kavadis and having all those piercings, and then they just offer them to the god. It is very consistent finding. When you ask them why they perform the rituals, they're originally baffled and surprised, and it's hard for them to find an answer. So they really have to look inside. A lot of people will give you a straightforward answer, so they will say things like, we do it to get something back, I do it for my business to improve, for my health to improve. And most people will just say, we do it for the god, and they'll leave it at that. And if you pressure them more, they will say, well, I don't know why God would want me to do that, but that's what we do. More often than not, they don't really know why they perform the rituals. It's just something that they do. And even at the reflective level, once you discuss this with your participants, a lot of the time you hear them say, yeah, you're right, I don't know why I perform my rituals. It's just something we've always done and we'll keep doing. How can these things have ever begun in the first place? That's a really big question. Well, once they're in place, you can see how they can draw in participants because they have these intense physiological and psychological effects, and you can also see that they have some functions on the social level that might help them persist in time. These rituals reinforce social cohesion, so they bring the entire community together. It makes them more pro-social. We have some evidence for that. It creates a feeling of what Durkheim described as a collective effervescence, this feeling of oneness with the crowd and a feeling of assimilation. And some people suggest that this has group strengthening effects, that it might be providing an advantage to the group in terms of competing with other groups. We wanted to measure the effects of ritual intensity on pro-social behavior. So what we did in this study is that we set up a small lab right next to the temple, and we got tremendous support from the local community who actually gave us the space to use and encouraged the people to participate in our study. So right after finishing their ritual, they would come into this room and they would take part in the study. And what we did is that we compared two types of rituals. One is the Kavadi ritual, basically self-inflicted torture, and the other one was just a communal prayer. So what we did is that the participants would come in and answer a set of questionnaires, and then we would thank them for participating. We would pay them 200 rupees, and we would give that in coins of 20, so we had a scale of 1 to 10. And before they left, somebody asked them if they would like to make an anonymous donation to the temple. So they would enter a room and put the money into an envelope and then leave. What we found there was, according to our hypothesis, that people who took part in the higher deal gave much more than those in the lower deal. Most interestingly, this effect held not only for performers but also for observers. So the entire community on the day of the Kavadi became more prosocial. And importantly, we asked people to rate their pain during the ritual, and we found a significant correlation between the reported levels of pain and donation. So the more painful this was for the participant, the more money they donated. We know from behavioral economics that people are not profit-maximizing, rational, self-interested bastards, as rational choice theory would have it. People are very emotional in making these sort of decisions. For example, we know that in the dictator game, where people have the option to simply keep all the money and not give anything to the other player, they don't. Most of the time they give something back, even when there's no chance of meeting that person again, and if it's anonymous. In this case, there's some psychological mechanisms that might be in place here. For example, I did this extremely painful and costly thing, therefore I must really like this community, right? So I must be more prosocial towards them. And this is completely unconscious. I'm not saying that this is a calculation being held in the conscious mind. This is way below that. We come to infer attitudes based on behaviors, and we do this by observation every day of others, but we also apply this to ourselves. I have done this, therefore I must be such and such, right? And the same applies to rituals. I have done this incredibly costly, potentially dangerous thing, so I must really like it, and it must be really important.